So this is the Adcom 545 Mark II. The original design was by Nelson Pass, who is now known for Pass Labs and First Watt Designs. And as you can imagine, this amplifier is pretty old, designed in the 1980s. Now, considering that it was designed in the 1980s, it had fairly good specs. It had relatively low distortion for 1980s amplifier, and also it output 100 watts. And you can see the full set of measurements done at kenrockwell.com. And again, the whole point of this amplifier was basically a no-frill design, focusing on short signal path, great class AB sound, outputting 100 watts into 8 ohms, high current bias, and even a little kind of protection here for thermals, and a distortion alert that would go on if it passed 1% distortion at any given point. Now, that LED, I've never seen it come on, but it is nice to know that it's there. Again, the casing work was pretty fabulous for an amplifier around $500 at the time. Now, that is much more money now, but this amplifier can be had in the used market for about $300 to $500 today. And I bought it and I decided to basically recap it because it's been more than 20 years. You want to recap amplifiers around after 20 years. So I recapped it and it was good to go, brand new as it came. Well, except for the casing, of course. The casing has seen better days. And I didn't do that. Just for reference, I didn't do that. That was the previous owner. Throwing you under the bus there, bud. Anyhow, turning the amplifier to the back side, we got this permanently attached power cord. Now, of course, you can upgrade this by sending it off to a tech and they'll do it for you, but that also will cost you a pretty penny. Overall, if I went ahead and got a quote for replacing this with a power socket so that I can use my own power cords, it would cost me around another $100 to $200 depending on the tech's bench time. Now, again, these binding posts, pretty cheesy. You can kind of hear the squeaky. You hear that? Yeah, that was pretty typical. And these were just plastic, just, normal binding posts. But considering that this amplifier is 40 plus years old, yeah, still works. And it surely beats those screw-on vintage connectors. That's basically screws. Just screws. You're screwing on your cables. But all in all, I'm about $800 to $1,000 in on this. And after that, it's practically brand new and functional for another 20, 30 years. Well, minus the casing. But yeah, unless I want to upgrade the binding post and the power cable, which will cost me an additional few $100s, this amplifier has been a great workhorse and been in my vintage collection for a while. In fact, comparing this amplifier to a lot of the modern day amplifiers, for the price, this amplifier offers incredible performance and value and a lot of things that audiophiles like myself want. It's high current, has all the protection circuits that you possibly need, including thermal and distortion notifications basically, and it outputs 100 watts into 8 ohms and probably doubles into 4 ohms since it's a high current amplifier. So that's a lot of power. Again, a lot to love about this vintage amplifier, and it comes to this day one of my highest recommended vintage amplifier that you can buy and be satisfied. And of course, I'm assuming that you want to know how it sounds, and how it sounds is quite interesting. Considering that it was 1980s and a lot of the components at the time were colored, warm sounding, rich sounding, had that vintage vibe, this amplifier wasn't so much like that. In fact, it represented neutrality. It was quite neutral and the measurements suggest that just as much. And to this day, it's relevant. Comparing this amplifier to a lot of the neutral amplifiers today, I find this amplifier to sound natural subjectively to my ears, even though it is a very linear, neutral amplifier that I can rely on. It has great soundstage, great depth, great width for a solid-state amplifier, and great bass emphasis. It had good damping factor, so it was able to take on those low notes and really swing. Even putting these against like modern day amplifiers, like I said, it's no slouch in terms of bass tightness, linearity, and overall neutrality with the soundstage that I expect from amplifiers that cost 2 or 3 times as much. Now this is not the vintage Adcom. This is the modern day Adcom. This is the 555MS. And compared to the 545 Mark II that I have, it has a lot of similarities, but also doesn't have some of the concerns that comes with owning a vintage unit. First of all, this obviously comes with warranty, and if you ever run into servicing issues, which you shouldn't because these units are quite reliable, but if you do, the dealer that I'll be linking in the description below is a tech himself and will be able to service this if you buy from his store. And of course, because this is a new unit, you don't have to recap it. It's good to go for another 20-30 years because it has new beefy caps inside them. Still has the distortion notification if it goes over 1% distortion, and it does also have thermal protection as well, just like the old vintage Adcoms do. And down to the casing is pretty darn similar to the vintage Adcoms. Now this one weighs slightly more, and that's probably due to the heavier transformer inside that I'll show you in a minute. But taking a look at the back, it has some stuff that was a concern on vintage units that's no longer a concern with modern amplifiers. Oh look, what is that? Yeah, now you can use your own power cord. Now, it's not a knock on Adcom per se. A lot of vintage units in the past had attached cables that drove me absolutely nuts. But here, you can have detached cables. Now, a quick note on why I personally don't like attached cables on vintage units or even on modern units. It's because if that cable goes, then it goes. The entire amplifier goes. You have to get it serviced. And that's not a pain that you know until you get there. And of course, you still get the plastic binding post, but no more squeakiness. Now, of course, you can use deoxit or clean it better than I did to get rid of the squeaking noise to some degree. But this is a problem I had with a lot of vintage Adcom units where the binding post would just be squeaky as heck. By having two of these in bridge mono, you can output 400 watts into 8 ohms, but if you have a single one, it outputs 125 watts into 8 ohms and nearly doubles at 200 watts into 4 ohms because it's a high current design. Now, a lot of you guys ask me, how do I know an amplifier is high current? You know, how do you know? Well, a telltale sign is that if it amplifies and doubles into 4 ohms, then that means that it's more likely to be a high current design. Now, a lot of the things that I personally liked about the old Adcom and what a lot of people love about the vintage Adcom still exists with this amplifier. It's high current, you can drive most speakers and have really grippy bass, and overall, neutral balanced sound that has a pretty nice soundstage and spacious sound without the clinicalness and analytical kind of sound, that thin sound that some neutral amplifiers these days can have. This amplifier back in the day was a pretty darn good buy, a no-frill design that was much loved. And to this day, it is my highly recommended amplifier in the vintage market if you're looking for a starter amplifier. In fact, vintage Adcom isn't just a good starter amplifier compared to even a lot of modern day amplifiers. It was just very much comparable. That's why I still have the 545 Mark II. But this one is just modern. Now, the modern day Adcom just has better reliability. You don't have to switch the capacitors because they're new. And you get the upgrades that you would have to spend a few $100s for, like switching out the power cord so you can use your own, the binding post and stuff like this. It's just newer, right? So it's more trouble-free. So I'm about $800 to $1,000 in on the 545 Mark II. This is about $1,400 US. So it kind of makes sense. And this Adcom is no joke. This amplifier, when compared side by side with much more expensive amplifiers costing $2, $3, and much more, it stands its own, and it has a very neutral, balanced, but very musical kind of sound. But of course, the modern day Adcom has few key differences, while it has the similar philosophy of keeping the signal short as possible, high current design, and no frill kind of design philosophy. It has improvements, like it has a bigger toroidal transformer, more chunkier toroidal transformer, which is always nice to see. And actually underneath this board here, you don't quite see it, but you see chunky 4 filter capacitors that Adcom is very much well known for, but it's a little bit more chunkier and of course newer on this unit. Overall, still a no-nonsense, no-frill design, giving stuff that us audiophiles like high current, good power, and ability to drive pretty much any speaker in most rooms. Now, why change something that isn't broken, right? The original Adcom sounded fantastic, a lot of people loved it, and this Adcom is much the same way. It has that neutral profile, like I said. I don't hear any kind of boost in the bass, boost in the mid-range, or a focus in the high frequency. Everything is very well balanced, but the distinction here is that even though it's a neutral amplifier, it has a wide and deep soundstage, a holographic soundstage, akin to some tube amplifiers. No, I'm not making a claim that this has a soundstage as holographic as a real tube amplifier, but for a solid state amplifier, even today, it has exceptional soundstage width and depth, which makes it a fun, engaging, and a natural type of listening experience. And once again, one thing that I really love about the vintage Adcom as well as the modern Adcom here is that they are natural sounding. They don't sound clinical or lean or lifeless like some neutral amplifiers that I've tested in the recent years. And again, this amplifier has a lot of stuff that audiophiles may want. A short signal path, high current design, relatively low distortion, and mostly a natural and neutral sounding experience that can drive with power and dynamics with most speakers. And hell, it might even have a pride of ownership because it was originally designed by Nelson Pass. Audiophiles love to talk about, my amplifier was designed by Dan D'Agostino, John Curl, Nelson Pass, and so on. Well, the original design was by Nelson Pass. In fact, Nelson Pass in the 1990s, shortly after leaving Adcom, designed his own company called Pass Labs. And no, I'm not going to be making any silly claims saying stuff like, this sounds as good as Pass Labs, because I've not compared them side by side. But whether it be Pass Labs, Adcom, or First Watt, all these are Nelson Pass's designs. And Nelson Pass, its original philosophy still remains intact in all of these designs, like short signal path and having enough power at low distortion with the ability to actually drive reactive loads like a loudspeaker. And that's one thing I admire and respect about Nelson Pass. He understands that his amplifiers are going to drive real speakers in the market. And while that seems common sense, a lot of the times I talk to manufacturers and designers of amplifiers, sometimes I feel that they forget that their amplifier is supposed to drive many speakers, many different speakers in different homes. And Nelson Pass understands that perfectly. Because I must have paired like 12 different modern speakers to this amplifier, as well as many, like probably 30 plus in my time of having vintage Adcoms. And they all sounded exceptionally great. Because once again, it's a neutral amplifier that lets the other stuff like your speakers, your preamplifier, and so on shine. So yeah, I want to add a little bit of tube characteristic to it. I can add my ARC tube preamplifier and it just shines through, making the sound even more holographic than with solid state preamplifiers if I really wanted to. Even adding that little bit of tube magic to Adcom has really good effect. And that's like, Class D amplifiers these days. A lot of people would like to mate tube preamplifier with Class D amplifiers. However, I've had better luck pairing the Adcom with a tube preamplifier and getting the result, the sound that I want, than with any Class D amplifier. And the reason is because even with a tube preamplifier, a lot of the Class D amplifiers in and around this price point still is too lean for my personal liking. With the Adcom, even by itself, it doesn't sound lean. With a tube preamplifier, it even sounds even more meatier and even more rupturous in the bass with a larger and holographic soundstage, which is what I personally enjoy. Now, with that being said, the only gripe that I have with this amplifier that I have now is that it only has single-ended inputs. However, the upper model does have XLR balanced inputs with a little bit more power output. And this is actually the one that my Patreon bought and is very, very satisfied. Now, not just him, but few other Patreons of mine listened to Pass Labs and they fell in love with it and they wanted to buy it, but their budget wasn't quite there. So naturally, I recommended that they try Adcom. And after having tried Adcom, a few of them bought it and they are very, very satisfied with the sound.
Hey, what's up? This is Suwad. I'm Jay's buddy. Welcome to Audiophile Confessions. $8,000 on a Pass Labs X350.8. It was great. I loved it, but I couldn't really afford it, so I sold it. And then I asked Jay, what should I get? He recommended Adcom. So I pulled the trigger, I bought a 565 SE, and I loved it. I still have it. I have no regrets selling the past labs, so thanks, Jay, for the great recommendation.
Now again, it's a few $100s more than the model that I have here, but my Patreons who have bought it describe the sound to almost a dot to exactly how I heard the MS, and they've been ever since very satisfied with the amplifier. Now there are sonic differences between the vintage Adcom and the modern day Adcom, but those differences are relatively small, but I'll explain them here regardless. Most importantly, the overall sound on both the vintage and modern Adcom is neutral with that wide and deep sound stage and really rupturous bass, great mid-range, great high frequency that's not fatiguing, glaring, or fatiguing whatsoever, as long as your speakers are not fatiguing. Again, this is a pretty transparent amplifier to the source and your speakers. It kind of gets out of the way. However, I wouldn't really classify the vintage or the modern day Adcom amplifiers as a kind of like a straight wire with gain type of thing, since it does have a little bit of that warmth and richness, especially in the bottom end, and that meaty texture in the mid-range that is making the amplifier sound pretty enjoyable, but nevertheless, it still allows it to be very much a good match with majority of the speakers out there and kind of gets out of the way. Now, funny enough, the main difference is what people have been describing past labs versus vintage Adcom to be. Searching on the forum really quickly, I found multiple people comparing past labs to vintage Adcom and found that people found the past lab to be overall more transparent, a larger soundstage, and a little bit more rupturous in the bass. And that's exactly what I find with the modern day Adcom. Now again, I'm not saying it's as good as past labs, but from my experience, the modern day Adcom seem to have a little bit more rupturous bass, better bass control, has a little bit more cleaner, more transparent type of sound, while keeping again the overall neutrality and non-fatiguing factors still in check. And third, the high frequency is a little bit more nuanced and detailed and refined. And again, these differences are quite small. And again, these differences are made after the vintage unit has been recapped and brought back to spec. And just a quick disclaimer, I would definitely not recommend buying a vintage Adcom at this point in time and then just using it as is. It is very important that you recap them and bring them back to spec, since these amplifiers are fairly old now. And at the end of it, you'll be about $800 to $1,000 in, which I still think is an amazing deal for a vintage Adcom, but that will not include the IEC cable, so you cannot use your own power cord. It'll be with the stuck power cord, and things like swapping out the binding posts or exchanging them or upgrading them. Those things are not included, so those will be additional cost. So considering all that, this new Adcom at $1,400 seems like a pretty good deal considering that you don't have to have any of those headaches with the vintage units. And this is just my personal opinion, but I think most audiophiles will be 100% satisfied with this amplifier since it has a lot of stuff that, again, audiophiles love, including myself. And that's why I'm gonna be personally buying the one with the balanced connection, since I love the balanced connection myself and I kinda need it. And really, as a lot of Adcom users in the past and present can attest to, it's really not a joke. This amplifier, even though it is a budget amplifier, it is nothing like a budget amplifier in the market. In fact, it is one of the best amplifiers I've heard to this date. Whether you go vintage and recap it or buy the modern Adcom, you'll be thoroughly impressed, whether it be the dynamic swings when you play tracks like Queen Mary by Francine 13, Bass I Love You by James Blake, or Madness by Muse. You know, the standard bass torture tracks that I love to play. This has amazing control and dynamics, and you can hear it even down to the sub bass, since this is a pretty flat linear amplifier down to like 5 Hertz or something like that. So again, very, very neutral, natural sounding amplifier, and I usually don't like my amplifiers to be so neutral since they can come across lean sometimes, but this amplifier just doesn't seem lean or sound lean whatsoever. It has a full sound in the mid-range, neutral, balanced, great holographic soundstage. Like, I literally don't have anything to really nitpick and complain about the sound aspect of this amplifier, and that's kind of rare. You know, I usually have something to nitpick, but really, you know, yes, you can have more finesse and want more finesse, but do I really need more finesse and more detail? Especially when it sounds so natural and good as it is? It's an amplifier that makes me think because it really sounds natural. I wouldn't really change a thing about the sound of this amplifier. I'm thoroughly impressed. It's a beastly amplifier, has enough power in most rooms, small to medium. If you're in a large room, then I would go get another one just so that I can have extra power for a very large room. But it can drive most speakers. Like, it's high current, like I said, there's a lot to love about this amplifier. And for that reason, it is going to be my main amplifier at this price point that I use as reference to compare to others in the future in case I do find something better. But so far, I think for the price, this amplifier is a clear winner amongst many amplifiers I have tried in around this price point. And that includes stuff like even the Choco Ime that I reviewed and raved about, since that amplifier has a more tubey and richer kind of characteristic, and it's an integrated amplifier. But this amplifier is just more neutral, natural, open sounding, spacious sounding. And again, if you want to try Adcom, maybe start vintage. But if you don't want the headache and you want the warranty and just modern day parts, then consider the new Adcom. I think it's just as good, if not better. So that's it from me. I hope this video was helpful and entertaining. And if it was, consider clicking the like button. And I hope you subscribed for future videos just like this. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Until next time.